This is, I've started the recording, Accumulated Knowledge, Episode 3, Derek Blayota, Joseph Puglisi. And here we're talking
That's me.
about our RC testing for Denver. So broadly, we want to kind of talk about like what's the difference between playing and testing and our process, and then also how that ties into making yourself a better Magic player long term. Did you want to lead us into our first subject, Joseph?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that sort of a level up moment for me was learning how to think about the difference between playing and testing. I think it's pretty common and was definitely the case for me that I conflated the two. So I'd be playing a lot of Magic and then wondering why each event still felt the same and I never felt prepared despite playing a lot of Magic. So I think the difference testing is much more valuable in preparing for an event than playing is. So playing usually takes the form, at least in my mind, of jamming just a lot of games of Magic with roughly the same level of intensity and focus put into each one. So you're just getting sort of raw reps and helping to build familiarity with your deck.
Right. I mean, I think also like testing has part to do with how you're engaging with it mentally. I think if I'm just jamming random leagues, I'm not as mentally invested in the games as if I was, something that I've done in the past to try to increase my investment is just like put 20 ticks on your testing matches because you're just going to care more if you have some amount of stakes on these games rather than just playing a league. You don't care about the league at all. You could 0-5 the league, you don't care. And when you're playing games that you don't care about, you're not thinking through the game actions as much, and you're just not being as thoughtful about how you're engaging with this like routine of practice that you're trying to get better at. The other like key thing is that you need to think about, am I getting quality practice right now? Because when I first started playing a bunch of Magic Online, I would play like 4 or 5 leagues in a day, and I could tell you by like the 15th or like the 15th match or like somewhere in the second or third league, I would be basically learning nothing each match because I would be so like tired and just on autopilot that I would just not be getting anything of real equity. And at that point, you have to like step away, realize what's going on, and then either think of how you can re-engage yourself with this by taking like a break, or just step away from it. Honestly.
Yeah, it's I call it junk volume, right? Where you're putting a lot of effort in, and or rather, you're not putting a lot of effort in, but you're putting a lot of time in. So it's equivalent to people who play chess, and they've played 10,000 blitz games, and yet their rating has not increased because it's just not the way to improve at the game, right? So you're playing all of these games at the same baseline level, and
Mm-hmm.
sort of like you said, just autopiloting. Whereas focused intensity in a testing session, in a testing match where you review afterwards, discuss and think about what things looked like and try to draw conclusions,
Right.
playing some of those is going to level you up much more quickly than playing 100,000 league matches.
And I also think it's like part of what led to me to a lot of my development was surrounding myself with people who were really hungry and who wanted to improve themselves. If you're playing with a bunch of people who do not care about the outcome of the tournament, they're naturally just not going to be trying hard in the testing games, and they're not going to be giving you both accurate data and like for me, I found it very valuable to have teammates that cared as much about the event as me because that made me want to try harder when I saw everyone else working super hard. But if I'm surrounded by a bunch of people that don't care and aren't trying very hard, then I'm not going to try very hard.
Yeah, you definitely rise or fall to the level of the group that you surround yourself with, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you want to test with people who are slightly better than you.
Right.
And that's the best way to get through.
Um, and yeah, quality is definitely more important than quantity. And I would also say that you, as you're like getting better, you need to consistently. It's like hard because finding connections can be difficult, but hopefully it's like let's say you start off at D rank and then you like practice a bunch and you improve up to C rank by like trying a bunch, and then you can hopefully find some people around that C rank and then you can work together with them to continue improving yourself up to the B rank, and you can just keep improving your practice quality while you're improving up the like skill level of yourself. And part of that comes through like qualifications because naturally, as you know, you go from winning an RCQ to then working for the RC. The amount of people that you can work with is usually also people who are qualified for the RC, so that's like a filter filtering out people who otherwise like wouldn't qualify for the RC. And then the same thing happens for the PT where it's like, well, everyone you're usually testing with for the PT is qualified for that PT, and that's like a pretty strong filter against people who wouldn't be good enough to make it otherwise.
Yeah, and I think generally the Magic community of people who want to get better, if you show that you have the fire, you're hungry, you want to put in the work and put in the hours, people are open to, people want to help each other.
Yeah,
Rising tide lifts all boats, right?
yeah, definitely. I
Push
think
people out, and they'll
I,
get
I
that energy back.
yeah, I've had so many times where I feel like, even from when I was just like very young playing at the LGS all the way up to very recently, that I've gotten super lucky at how kind and just how willing people are if you show that you have the passion to open up and be like, okay, well, this person, maybe isn't quite on my level or, maybe isn't quite that good right now, but if they're trying hard and they're doing the right, like their process is good, then that goes a long way for a lot of people, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Um, you have an example that's Brotherhood's End versus Fawn against Yogg. I assume this is just in Rhinos. Did you want to? What
Yeah.
specifically?
So one of the things that I think is key to the testing process, at least how I think about it, is trying to find the truth of a matchup or draw like true conclusions.
Right.
And it can be hard, especially when there's sort of conflicting information. So the example that I put here was Brotherhood's End versus Force of Negation against Yawgmoth out of Modern Rhinos. Both of these cards are initially appealing as sideboard options. Force of Negation good against Cauldron, good against Cord. Brotherhood's End a sweeper against a deck full of cheap creatures. But the more I've played the matchup in my testing, and Eric, you had some games where you and I were both looking at the same game and sort of staring at this Brotherhood's End in our hand, wishing it was a Force of Negation. So I think I started out on the baseline of I expect Brotherhood's End to be better than Force of Negation against Yogg, primarily because it's a sideboard card that I'm playing for this matchup.
Right.
And then after playing with it more, sort of realized, at least for me, I think I'd rather have the fourth Force of Negation before the first Brotherhood's End.
Right. Well, so I I don't know if I would go as far to say is that you want the fourth Force Negation before the first Brotherhood's End because they kind of do different things. But I think there's a lot of context that maybe doesn't make sense at a glance for why that Force Negation would be better than you think, and also that Brotherhood's End may be worse than you think. For why I think Brotherhood's End is kind of worse than you may think. First, we don't care about a lot of the like little like shitters that they put on the board because our rhinos will be pressuring the life total, and like the axis that we want to fight them on is denying their mana dorks early so that they can't get down a quick Yogg, and then also pressuring their life total so Yogg doesn't actually do anything. But if they have like a Bowmaster token, and then a Bowmaster, and then like a 1/1 insect off Grist, and they have like a Grist on 5 loyalty, Brotherhood's End may seem okay, but where it's really contesting us is in the like 3-drop slot because we often want to be going turn 3 Cascade, turn 4 Cascade, or like turn 3 Cascade, turn 4 Subtlety, and our mana is like so already allocated by these really high equity cards that I don't know if it really makes sense to be playing this card. It's like it's not cleaning up matches that we would otherwise be losing, and it's in a situation that's already very saturated. And on the contrary, the force negation, I think, gets better post board when they're boarding in chalices and their chords become a lot more powerful because chord isn't just getting Yawgmoth all the time, it's now getting Soulless Jailer. And when they can Soulless Jailer to shut down your Cascade, you've not only wasted your Cascader, but it's also stopping future Cascaders. So you need to have a Shatter Effect or just another way to kill it, like Dismember. And you need to have another Cascader before you can start getting pressure. And often that Soulless Jailer like interaction along with some pressure from the Yogg player, like a coherent hand, can lead to a lot of winning board states because it's such a blowout. But Force Negation countering that, and or countering the chord I should say, and also countering the chalices post board. It also has some other reasonable targets in like Cauldron. It actually goes up in stock.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. It sort of naively you would expect this card to be good, but it conflicts with your actual plan for the matchup, whereas Force of Negation is a unique effect that synergizes really well with your plan.
Right. And yeah, it's
So
it's about thinking not just at like, is this card good in this matchup? Like, is a counterspell theoretically good here? But analyzing the context behind what is going on here, and you need to see how like Rhinos is extremely bloated on the 3 drops. So if you're bringing in a 3 drop, you want it to be an absolute banger. You can't have it be like a 5 or a 6 out of 10. And that's unfortunately where Brotherhood End lands a bit more than when I would want it to be in that matchup.
100%.
So like the second part of this is like, how was our testing process for this? And for me, I've already played a bunch of Modern. I started off with playing Scam after the ban. Realized that Scam just like wasn't very good. Didn't like it for various reasons. Thought the ban just like made it much worse. And then I tried Amulet for a little bit. Didn't vibe with the deck. And then picked up Rhinos. And quickly found that it was the best deck about 3 weeks ago. And basically, in hindsight, I wish our RC was 3 weeks ago because I think I would have had a larger edge over the field. But Rhinos has gotten significantly more popular, which also means the hate's a little bit bigger. So I think I'm kind of playing last week's deck in a sense, but I am mostly fine with my choice. And I guess I would also say that while there is some things that are coming up to try to counteract the high volume of Rhinos that is surfacing, the ability for Rhinos to basically, like, you have Rhinos at like tier 1, and then at like whatever's below it, the decks that beat up on Rhinos often also get stomped out by like the stuff right below that maybe loses to Rhinos. Like Amulet's a great example of this, where it's like theoretically Amulet's behind versus Rhinos, but it beats all the things that are trying to beat Rhinos so well that it has this like weird position in the metagame. And in these kinds of like situations, I often just like defaulting to the tier 0 thing, because in these open entry events, so many people refuse to play the best deck.
Yeah, it's interesting that you started out with Scam, journeyed through Amulet, and then ended up.
Yeah. How did your testing
I
process
sort of
go?
started out on Amulet. Yeah, I started out on Amulet. Um, had a very good result in the modern show. Weeks and weeks playing, comparing plans, developing the list, and then ultimately sort of started to think, man, it's just not. The deck is not well positioned enough to be worth this. The juice isn't worth the squeeze. Right? I think sort of similarly to how you felt about Scam.
Right.
So I ended up pivoting to the same place and looking at, okay, what deck has a powerful proactive game plan and also has the tools to beat the hate, and I
Mm-hmm.
think that is Rhinos. As we're looking, okay, who has a truly good plan against rhinos, and maybe it's only living end that I'm truly, afraid of.
Right. I mean, I would also say that like some of the decks that beat rhinos are Delver killers, or like very parallel to Delver killers in my mind. And when I say Delver killer, I mean a deck that theoretically beats Delver or in this example rhinos, but just kind of sucks in like the aspect where it loses to a bunch of other things. And even when it beats Delver, the capacity to beat Delver, it is like 55% or whatever. It's like very hard to get an edge over Delver because Delver is doing something so much better than the format on a power level basis that it's like hard to structure. Like, even if your cards line up well on a theoretical basis, the other deck's like average draw is just much better than your average draw and it's more consistent at doing that it will win games when both players just draw their like 40th percentile or whatever that it otherwise shouldn't be. Like a good example of that I would say is like the Assault Loam deck where it's like, yes, theoretically, Assault Loam, if it gets going, is like good versus Rhinos. And they are playing cards like Termagoyf, which are theoretically good versus Rhinos, but their deck is like so incoherent and clunky and lacking filtering that it can flood out a lot more. Rhinos is so good at not flooding, and it's like, well, you can also just like bash in for Rhinos when the Termagoyf's a little bit too small, and then like bounce it once, and then you get in for the rest. You can counter their like imagine they like tap out for Assault Loam, you just like force negation it. You're tempoing them out of the game while you're like smashing them with Rhinos, and you're leveraging free spells while applying a bunch of pressure much better than their like fairer, slightly more well set up deck is.
Yeah, the Rhinos deck just has infinite moves. There's
Yeah, I
anything
mean,
that
you're just playing like
hit.
8 free spells that counter a bunch of stuff, and when you just like cascade on turn 3 and cascade on turn 4 with a bunch of free spells to pitch all your cards, it's really hard to like beat, even if your deck should line up well theoretically.
100%.
Yeah, and I do think like spending some time in between on other decks was pretty interesting. For what I did well personally this season, I think I just identified the best deck pretty far out and just tuned it. And while it wasn't very rewarding at a certain point to continue iterating on Rhinos, I'm kind of fine with where I ended up. Maybe wish I was like playing Living End or something, but it was pretty hard to have the foresight this far out to be playing something like that. And what I could have done better is mostly I think I didn't put that much effort into this RC compared to previous ones. Basically, when I found out that Rhinos was the best deck, I'm not like a massive Rhinos enthusiast or anything. I don't think its games can be that interesting. And even though I put in a decent amount of work, this is maybe the least motivated I felt for an RC, and like outside of maybe Atlanta, where it just felt like Pioneer all over again. I just haven't really enjoyed this cycle that much, I guess. And I think that's kind of showed in like I've like skipped modern challenges when I'm able to, even though it's like I could use the reps. Like this week I haven't played any prelims. I'm also like pretty busy with life, but I think if I was like really enjoying it, I could definitely be allocating more time and managing how much effort I put in for how much I'm enjoying Magic is something I could probably regulate better.
Yeah, and I think it's hard, especially maybe the most interesting dynamic, and I wonder how this is going to play out in the actual event, is that Modern is a difficult format to get a significant deck edge in against the field. If you break Standard, for example, you can really get a huge. You could be significantly favored against the field.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you show up to this RC with the best deck list, the edge you're gaining against the field realistically is not that significant compared
Right.
to being familiar with the format, playing reps, etc. So it makes sense to me that you would have felt a lack of motivation because it's not really that rewards
Well,
that as much.
I think there's always going to be like some amount of deck edge, uh, but
So,
I guess to me, I did not enjoy this as much, and I think also part of this is like the shininess of the RC system or whatever you want to call it. Like the novelty of playing these events has diminished as I've played more of them, and trying to manage realistic goals along with outside external life factors is like a pretty important thing to me in how I want to continue leading a balanced Magic life and a balanced real life.
Is this the start of the Derek retirement arc? Because
Um, I don't
as
think
soon
I'm
as you announce
retiring,
the retirement, the
but
tournament victory,
I am somewhat
I'm
planning
assuming
to like. Our next RC isn't for like 4 months or whatever, right?
like that.
It's like in June, right, or May.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably not gonna like play maybe as much as I have in the past, at least for a little bit, and just try to figure out if I can continue doing this and be happy. Because at the end of the day, this is my hobby, and I was having a conversation with a friend last night that was like, uh, I wasn't enjoying our testing games, and his response was like, "Yeah, that's going why I'm going to Denver as like a for fun trip." And I was like, "I don't want Magic to be a for fun hobby to me. Magic isn't a thing I just do like casually. I'm like kind of a sicko about it, but also that means that if I can't be a sicko and also still like be happy while being a sicko, then I need to like I'm not just gonna let myself sit here and be a sicko and not be happy because Magic has felt insanely rewarding me when I'm a sicko and then I get those results. But if I'm being a sicko and then not being happy and not getting the results, it's like, well, what are we doing here?
Yeah, that's one of the hardest things I think about Magic as a competitive outlet is in a large sample size, it's rewarding to skill, but in the short term, you can end up in a spot where you put in a lot of work and don't see an immediate reward.
Right. I mean, there's
Yeah,
like no clear correlation there, even though there's like uh nudges in the right direction. Even like John Finkel only won like 70% of his GP matches. I mean, he still lost like 30% of the time or whatever. And you kind of have to eat that variance when you're playing Magic.
yeah, it's a hard problem because the rewards are so stacked towards the statistical outliers.
What did you feel you did well or could do better in this testing season?
I think one thing that I did well was set myself up with a good support network. And typically, what I'll do for these events, or what has tripped me up in the past, is sort of accepting too many outside influences from, shall we say, like maybe more unreliable sources, or putting myself in a spot where I'm too willing to take input from anyone and everyone. And I think this time I was able to put myself in a spot where I pared it down to a much smaller handful of people who I knew were very committed and whose judgment I trusted, and was able to really work with them to develop plans and do testing that I could rely on.
Right.
The
I think that point you made about trusting your teammates is like super important to me because if you don't trust your teammates, like let's say you played deck A versus deck B, and or like your teammate played those sets, and then they came to a conclusion, and you thought to yourself, I don't trust that outcome. You should not be testing with them because if your teammates do something and you don't trust them, then what's the point of them testing it, or like what's the point of you testing together? Like that trust is like super important to me. And there's been a couple of times this season where there's people I like really respect, and I'll say maybe I don't get why you're doing this right now, or I don't fully understand um, your reasoning, but I'm going to trust you because you're my teammate, and I hope that you reciprocate that trust when you come into that same situation. Because if you don't trust each other, then what's the point?
So is this your way of saying, Derek, that you're putting a gun to my head? Fourth subtlety is in the deck.
Yeah, get it in the deck. There's just no way we're cutting for subtlety. Surely you didn't post a list with 3 subtlety again, right?
Can we negotiate on 3 in the main, 1 in the side?
No. Just play.
Okay.
Okay. Here, Joseph. I'll give you an analogy. Does anyone play 3 Force of Will in Legacy? Does anyone play 3 Days in Legacy?
What about 3 Frilled Mystic in Standard?
No.
Okay. You've convinced me. I put 4 subtlety in my deck. I trust my teammate.
All right. Very good. You good to end this?
Always. Thank you, Derek. Always a pleasure talking with you.
Cool. Take care, everybody. Thanks for watching.